All right, welcome. And in this training, we're going to be talking about Maya's motion graphic toolset. It's called MASH. Very powerful tool, and it's a game changer in the motion graphic world. For those that like using Cinema 4D or Blender, it's not a problem. You could actually perform your design here and take it into the softwares. But the MASH motion graphic tool set is a very powerful tool, and I just want to talk about it a little bit. So let's jump right in. Okay. First of all, we want to make sure that MASH is always loaded in your system. Okay. So, for instance, if you come under your effects menu and you don't find MASH here in the menu set or in your menu, you could actually come on the Windows, go to Settings Preferences, go to Plugin Manager, and then you could search for MASH here, MASH, and just make sure it's loaded or auto load. So, but if you don't have a very strong system, you can turn off auto load, and then when you load MASH, you come in and load it by yourself manually. Okay, so that's if you don't have a very beefy system. Okay, so that's just that. All right, so the way I like to work with MASH, I like to use the motion graphics shelf. So we have the MASH shelf for the motion graphics shelf. So we use that for most of the time. All right, so first of all, I want to explain how the MASH network works. I'll be doing a lot of shortcuts and short menus here, and if you get lost along the line, I'd like you to take up my course, my Udemy course on Maya Essentials Training, for so that I teach all the basic things about the use of Maya, shortcuts, and all the hidden terms there. So you could watch that, and you come back to this video. All right, so first I want to create a cube, and since I don't have a cube right here, because I'm in the motion graphics set, I can actually click on this uh, option, and I would see it gives me a sphere here. If you right click on the arrow or on the point here, you will see other cubes. You can create cubes, linear, and other stuff like that. So typically, anytime in Maya you have this arrow, that means there are other things inside there. Okay, so but I'm not going to do some shortcuts, and usually when I want to create a new mesh, I'll hold down Shift or right click when not selected, and I have access to all the mesh. So any mesh works. Any mesh works. So whether it's a mesh or it's a full created model, whatever it is, it just has to be a mesh, and Mash will work with it. Mesh and mash. All right, so I got started down with the cube, right? And it's just a basic cube sitting down in the scene, nothing special about it. So I'll go under the mesh network here. So if I click on this network, it creates a linear, um, creates uh, a linear distribution for the mesh and range for 10 um, 10 instances. Okay, so let me come on that my attribute editor, and then you will see we have the mesh, and these are the nodes in the mesh network. Okay, and this is the distributes, and that's what's happening here. So we're on the linear, and we have the number of points, which is 10, which you can increase the number of points or reduce the number of points. And we have, if you like it, and then we have distribution type, which I'll be talking about shortly. So now, it's not, uh, it's by default that Mesh network loads the network of the points of distribution type to linear, but you could as well duplicate, uh, let me just undo everything. So if I come under Mash before I create the network, if you click on this setup here, you could see we have the geometry type they're creating meshes instancer, okay, in view messages, and your distribution type you could determine, okay, make linear the default or radial or grid, one of these options here. So it's not really like, for instance, if you go through radial and you click apply, you're gonna create a radial. So it's not really by default there. So I'll just undo this as well. Okay, so let's just go and create the mesh network. So let's talk about how this guy is intendedly working before I go into what the network is all about. So the original cube is still here. It's just hidden. As you can see it. So it's grayed out in the outliner. If you don't have your outliner, you click on this to get your outliner. So and press H to unhide my cube. Now, the mesh network is, it responds to um, transformation and geometric transformation, everything except translation. So I can move this around and it doesn't affect the work. But if I go into my rotate and then rotate this, you can see it rotates the network as well. Okay, and if I scale this, it also affects the network as well. So, and like I said, geometric, it also works with geometric translation. So let's say I move into the vertex node, let's select the vertex, and see it affect the instances as well. If I go into the edge mode, let's select an edge and move that edge, also does that same thing with the face node, let's select the face node and move it down. So both geometric and transformation options are replicated by the instances except the transform. So that's not really important here. So we just work with that. So for now, I'll just hide this back. So let's just give everything back from there back here. So it's hidden down there. All right. Okay, so now let's go into the mesh. In the outliner, we could see we have the cube there. That's a hidden one. Then we have what we call the mesh repro mesh, and that's what it created. Okay, and then we have the mesh, and then we have this. We also have the mesh menu that shows us the nodes that's like kind of like layers. So if you click here, you see all the layers. Right now, this is the mesh distributes, and that's the layer options that we have over here. If you don't want to use this or if you can't see it there, you can also get it from the mesh menu here and have the mesh editor. So let's get straight into this. Now, like I said, you could increase the number of points to whatever you want to have. And then we have what we call the distance, and this is the distribution on the X, Y, or the Z axis. So right now, this is 25 cubes. So you want to see the cubes well, you have to increase this to higher than 25. Okay. So it's this is for the spacing, distance on the x-axis. This is for distance on the z-axis. This is for distance on the y-axis. Okay, and then we have the center distribution that moves the first object from being left aligned to center aligned. So we have all the objects in the center. So that depends on what you're trying to create. You could be doing that, and there's nothing wrong in achieving that as well. Okay, so I'll just take this guys back to 10, and the distribution will get let's leave it at 12. Okay, all right. So now we have the rotation. Okay, let me put this at 20 so we could see. I like it when it's a bit more and maybe it's 22. Okay. So we have, like I said, the distance on the x and the y, that's lifted up in the y, and the z-axis movement on the z, offset along on the z-axis. And then we have the rotate, so rotate on the x, rotates the object on the x, rotates on the y as well, and then let's say it's the Z axis as well. So creates some interesting stuff with this, and we could scale on the x-axis, we could scale on the y-axis, scale on the z-axis, depending on what you want to achieve with all of this. And then we have what we call the strength node, and the strength options here, and it's works based on position, rotation, and scale. So here, when you reduce the strength, that means uh, there's no transformation. There's nothing there. So of course you need to distribute. So you need that. So where it gets fun is with the random strength. The random strength randomizes how the strength operates. So you can randomize its operation or its visibility. Okay, and the step strength kind of cuts it down by steps. All right. So now, like I said, this guy's position, rotation, and scale. So let's say I increase the scale on the y-axis, for instance, and if I reduce the strength, everything goes down. Okay. So, but if I turn off position, meaning the strength should not affect position, should let me where it is. If I reduce the strength, you could see that it's just reducing the scale and the rotation, and nothing about position. Okay, same thing with this. If I rotated this along the, let's say, the y-axis, okay, and I turn off rotation, I scale it out to rotation is still there, and right. So that's just what these guys do. It's just a filter to talk about what it it can reduce and not reduce. Okay, and then we have a ramp that actually shows how it speeds up. The ramps kind of show before gradients of how these guys work. So the interpolation of the trends and stuff. So you can make it a smooth, make it spline, or let's go back to linear. Or you could use the ramp here. These guys, I see it, and you could just play around with some of the indices here just to create some variations in your design. Okay, so that's just what that is used for. I'll just close this up. Right, so that's the ramp. So as we're going further into the training, I will talk a little bit more about the use of all this stuff. Okay, so this is the first distribution type. This is linear. Okay, now we have this button here that can turn off the distribution, but if we turn off the distribution, obviously there will be no mash. Distribution is kind of like the default um, tool set for the MASH. You know, MASH is an entirely modular and procedural tool. So everything we do is kind of like fake effects, you know. So it's entirely modular, entirely procedural. Procedural means this uh, originated from the software. It's not imported from a different software. All right, then so this was the linear. And then we have other distribution types here. So let's see radial, for instance. So when you go on the radial, we have the radial effect, and it creates a radial effect, and then we have the radius of the radial. Okay, so you can also increase the amount of points or reduce the amount of points depending on what you're looking for. Now, if you drag the slider to 20 and probably you wanted something larger, don't be limited by what we have here now on the slider. It's just uh, rhetorical, right? You could actually change or manually put in. So let's say I wanted 50. I could actually type 50, and then the slider adjusts to fit my specific size here. So I now have between 0 and 100. So I have 100 and I have 0. And if I want to get higher, I can just keep getting higher and higher. Let's go back to 20. Okay. Actually, let's go back to 10. Okay, then the angle just shows how, like, this is a radial, so that is circular, so that's 360 degrees, so the angle makes you use uh, the angle of completion for the circle there, right? And then we have the z offset, which will move the circle along the z axis. Okay. All right. And then we have the radial axis. So right now it's on the XY, which is the Z plane. It's facing the Z axis. So that's the Z plane. You can go to the X plane, which is the YZ. Means the circle is now facing the X and the ZX, which is the Y plane, which can mix that. So depending on whatever you're trying to design or create, you choose. There's no law that says you must use a specific axis. Okay, and then we have the same thing we had before. We had the strength, and strength, like I said, is just the visibility of the uh, influence of the mash, right, on the distributes on the mash. So down means no mash, up is the mash, and then randomize that as well. So right, so randomization and stuff like that. Everything else is just similar. Okay. All right. Now we have the spherical. Okay, spherical right now doesn't look very spherical, but it's actually creating a sphere. Right, let me turn off the grid so you can see what I'm talking about. So spherical, probably just change this so it's more visible for you. Okay, and I can increase the amount of points here, and like if I want, I can make it 1,000 points, and then we see this effect. Now, if it's getting too grayish like this, probably you want to change your render settings. So I could come on my renderer. I'm using the viewport 2.0. So I click here, go into my hardware render settings, and I want to talk about the ambient occlusion, so screen space ambient occlusion. I want to enable that. Now, once I enable that, you can see some shading appearing over here, and that's quite important. You definitely will want to have that kind of stuff. You may want to go into anti-aliasing as well, but this I would say do if you have a really beefy system. If your system is not so strong, don't bother about it, because if you add the anti-aliasing, anti-aliasing kind of breaks out the amount of edges that you find here. So not really important. So let's just go there. All right, so now same thing. I have the setup for my angle X and angle Y. So what angle X does is it's kind of makes the or reduces the objects to show up in the X-axis. So they kind of on the X-axis they are kind of cutting off basically. So kind of filling up space, right? So we have to radial setup like that. We also have for the angle Y, and the angle Y makes it kind of a flatter, yeah, that kind of option there. So that's what that one does. That's what this, and we have the radius as well, just to increase the size and then the animation speed. One of the cool things with Maya is if you right click on any of these parameters here, you have an option to create an expression, to set a key, set driven key, and whatsoever. Okay, then phase we have the strength and random strength. Now the random strength is very beautiful here. You can actually create an effect here. So let's say on screen 1, I want to set a key here, and then at screen 40, I want to take it up and right click and set key. So let's see how it works out. So let's see changes here. So let's say let's move to screen 40. Yeah. So let me break this connection. You break the connection so that there's no more keys anymore. All right. That's for the spherical. All right. So, and like I said, because the mesh is still very connected to the original object, I can scale. So it's not so large. Create down. That's like when you increase the scale. It depends what I want to do. Okay, next we have what we call mesh, and for the mesh to work, you have to have a mesh scene. So right now, if I click on mesh, mesh will be looking for a mesh that is up an external mesh. So let's say I create a sphere. Let's just create a sphere, a big sphere. side of this, you get confused. Because it's on mesh, I could now drag the mesh, middle mouse and click and drag the mesh and connect it here, input mesh. So I do that. And now the cubes are located on the mesh, okay? And we have the options to increase the number of points. Okay, we have the method of the mesh, which is right now scatter. We also have vertex, which will, let me turn on the wireframe on shaded so you can see what I'm talking about. So on the vertex, we could see the objects or the mesh distributes the cubes on the vertices of the mesh. Okay, and then if your mesh is not really, maybe there's too much spacing, you could actually flood your mesh, but we have a good spacing already. Then we have the random vertex. We have the face centers that places the the squares or the cubes on the faces um, of the mesh. And then we have the voxels, and the voxels are just 3D pixels. So just like we have pixels in 2D resolution, voxels are 3D pixels. So we have voxels as well, and that's if we're going to do voxel or volume modeling, so, and stuff like that. So the edges as well. So I'll just stick with scatter for now and push along normal. You could that's move the cubes from the mesh itself. And because they are also connected to the mesh doesn't need to be present. You could actually hide the mesh, select the mesh and press H. So the object will still work knowing that it's connected to that mesh. It doesn't need to be visible in the scene. It's just still going to be connected to the mesh. Okay, and then we have some other setups here for scales and import tools. All right, and then we also have another option, and this is in position PP. Right now, you won't see anything on this, but I will show you what this means. So this one works with particles in position PP. So these are particles, and in particles you can create particle positions and let the mesh behave in similar ways. So okay, so I'm just gonna start up a new, um, so I'm gonna go over all that again. So like, since we're dealing with, since we're dealing with mesh, let me try, so let me use a torus this time. I'll make it quite a large torus. Probably just change some parameters here. Section radius, maybe I'll make section radius at 3. All right, and yeah, I could increase this to maybe 30 by 30. Let's have some more subdivisions. Okay, so now if I make a cube here, I create a cube here and mash it, right? So I go back to the mesh, so I could add the torus to the mesh, and then we see this selections here. I could turn on these, so we see what's happening. Now I can turn this to vertex mode and flush it for around. So we have this scenario or this kind of problem. So we see stuff like this, and yeah, I can still go back into the mesh, and when I add more subdivisions, it just catches the flow. It doesn't really, it's very procedural, very adaptive to my design. Okay, so I could also on the mesh point, when we're talking about the strength. So here in our step strength, you use strength and you can have an animation of them growing into the objects, okay, something like that. So it's actually something that can work with. And then there is this option of we never really did the push along normals, and that's kind of moves the cubes from the mesh itself. So we have something like this. So push off from the normals. So let me reduce the size of the cubes a little bit, and maybe increase some of the subdivisions here. Let's go a little bit more with 30. Okay, and maybe higher like this. Okay. So if I push along normal, let's say I go to a higher number thereabouts. What this is doing, let's put this at 10. Okay, so we have this. So what we have is some kind of hide this. What we have is some kind of vortex effect here. The kind of vortex effects. Yeah, and it's quite interesting. Obviously, reduce the size of the cubes a little bit more. See more what's happening here. Okay, maybe increase this. Well, I could turn this to, rather than having cubes go, I could turn this to scatter mesh. Let me just add it here. Um, Let me remove it from flood. All right. Okay. Let's go back to the scatter. All right. So I could have as many options here, and let's go 10,000. So it's kind of much. So this push along vertices kind of takes the vertices away from the, takes them out of the original torus. So this is the original torus here. So we have this kind. We could actually have an animation of things passing through the vortex, kind of like a vortex effect. If you want to make it a little bit more interesting, you could have hardware fog, add a hardware fog to that, and probably just change the color, something, let's use blue, like blue for some reason. Okay, and yeah, everything, let's leave this at default, although it has some fall offs, but let's just leave it at default for now. And I'll remove the blue light. So we could have something like this. If turn off the grid, so we could have a camera view of something going in, and it looks like getting into a vortex of options, It's like, and as you go out, it fades off into the sky. So it's like, oh, you're getting into a planet, So your spaceship comes in, and you're like, oh, what's that? And you start going around, and you say, let's go into all those kind of stuff. Yeah, it's cool. It's something you can achieve from that. So let me just turn back this off, and let's go back here and see that. So that's one way we could do this, right? Let's turn back to linear. Let me turn on my grid. Okay. I can turn this back, right? Just reduce this distribution axis. Let's go to, let's do 20, right? Okay, so let's, now for in position PP to actually take place, because we selected right now, there is nothing, no particles that's connected to, so it needs to be connected before you select the distribution type. So I'm just going to do that right now. So what I want to do is under the FX menu set, I want to go on to end particles, and I want to use my end particle tool. So I want to create, this is 20 points, right? So let's say under my end particle tools, I want to create a number of particles, let's say 20 as well, okay? And that's what I want to do, and I'll keep that way. So let's go. So what happens here is with my end particle tool, let me turn off my mesh for now and just hide it. hide my repro. So my particle tool, I can come in here and click somewhere in the middle of the grid and just click the point there. So and press enter. Now once I do that, this little point I just created is actually 20 particles. Okay, so this is, I'm not going to be talking seriously about particles in this video. I'll cover it in another video, but just for the purpose of using it with the MASH, that's what I'm talking about it here. So in my M particles, so when my M particles, I come under M particle shape, and the first thing I want to play around with, I want to check some of these properties, and I want to ignore the solver gravity under dynamic properties. What that means is the M particle has a nucleus and it has works with gravity, so both works with the gravity of the scene. So I want to ignore the solver gravity so that it doesn't work with the gravity of the scene. Okay, so you can do that. And also, I want to change, right now it's hard to see, so I want to change the particle type here. So I want to go to the shading and turn up, right now it's in points. I want to make this spheres so we could see the particles as spheres. And then here where we have per particle array points, so that is the word. If I right click on position here, you see I have runtime expression before dynamics, and then I have that M particle shape one position. So what I need to get now is the expression for the MASH in position um, scenario. So I'll just do that. Well, okay. So I want to get that position. So let's go back to MASH quickly. Let's close this. I go back to MASH. So what we're looking for is in position PP. So remember camel case in capital P for position, then double P capital letters. That's what we want to write in that scenario there. So let's go back to M particles. Back to M particles, and okay, so that's what we're looking for. So now when I right click here in position, I run expression, runtime expression before dynamics. I want to copy this as is N particle shape one position. I want to get that here. So I could actually just copy this. I'll write it manually, but I could just copy it. So this will be equals to what I'm connecting it to. So the MASH, that's what I'm connecting it to. So MASH one, whatever the name is, the way it is, that's how you're gonna write it. So MASH one, right? And then I want to put a full stop, and then I want to write that expression, which is in, remember, capital P for position, and capital P, position PP, and then I put a semicolon. So now this creates an expression. It's like a JavaScript expression or stuff. So once I click on create, it now creates an expression. Okay, and now if I close this, you can see it spreads this across. Oh, no, I turned off my repro mesh. If I turn on my repro mesh now, so let me x-ray them. So you could see it has spread this guys based on the selection of my repro mesh. Okay, if I change this to, let's say, spherical, see it translates them as well. All right, so person play, nothing happens because I turned off the gravity, remember? So for us to see something happening, maybe I come to Mash and add a node. Let's say I add a signal node, this and then press play. Now you see them moving around. They're playing kind of fast, so let me change my play speed, playback speed. I want to play 24 frames per second times 1, see that. So let's see that play now. Let me increase this so you could see them playing funny game. So you could use that for some kind of motion graphics you try and create. Yeah, whatever that is. All right, so that is the EP stuff. So let me just go to a new scene because I already had the scene so logged up. All right, so now I go back, create a cube again. All right, MASH network. So the next distribute node or distribution type I want to talk about is the grid. And grid is also very popular. So you have a grid network here, and then we have the distance x, y, z, and we have the grid. So right now I have three grids, so you can increase the number. So let's say 5 by 5 by 5, or and then the distance and all. You can just get crazy. This way, 30, 30, take everything down this way, and then you have a random um, grids. So that was a nice grids. You can see that all the cubes are there. So let me just do this. So all the cubes are there, right? So that's just this. And same thing we have with the random strength and everything. So reduce the random and let it decrease. Just vanish into there. So let me get back to the black to see all that happening over there. Let me turn this guy on so we can at least see the shading, the grid. I think I like this gray. So I'm using Alt B to change my viewport shading. So like I said, this is covered in my Maya Essentials training video. So, all right, now uh, there's nothing special here right now, but once I start adding some other specific nodes to this, it will start being crazy on its own. So right now, there's nothing special here. I can't change uh, anything. I can only change how it's distributed along the grid. And the reason the distribute just allows the software to tell the mesh how to behave, and then we now have the other mesh nodes that work with the distribute. So for instance, we're adding random node to this. Okay, I could now randomly rotate the cubes in different directions. I could randomly space them out. Okay, and add a few maybe scales on either axis and stuff. So basically that. So I'll just turn off. Let's just turn off the node. Now, one of the things, like I said, about this cubes being interesting, like in the primary cube, let's go back to the primary cube. So this is the original cube, right? So let me go into it. So I use F to go into the selected object. So let's say for this cube, now I want to add some material to this. So let's say I want to add a new material to this. So let's use a green, why not? And change the color here to green. Okay, select this face, add a new material to this. Still a blue, why not? And now change color to maybe red, so very different. So just two colors, and this is colors for now. So we now have green and red. But check this out. It affects my grid. So even applying shaders to the original affects the instances. And this is one of the most powerful things about the mesh. You don't have to be worried about colorizing each and everything. Let's just get the colors down through the original and spread it over. You can actually do that. The other way you can colorize the mesh, in case you don't want to follow this procedure, is by adding a color node. So let's say I add a color node to the mesh. It adds a randomized color to this, so it's kind of white for now because it's not fixing the original. So here we have the random hue, saturation, random. I will talk about the nodes in a different video. Just trying to show something here. So here maybe I can choose a color like blue, for instance. Okay, and everything is blue. Here with the random hue, I can randomly change the hue for all the cubes. So just moving around randomly, you can already see that it's making some interesting coloration here. Okay, for the cube. So the more you go around, the more random it gets. Then the saturation random, based on saturation, which is the intensity of the color. So you can randomize the intensity of the color as well for each of the hues. You can change the value of the colors, so each of the hues, so whether it's bright or dark for each of the colors here. So we're dealing with colors today, so I won't have to talk too much about this. So basically, that's that. I will talk about the color node. Sorry. So in case you don't want to do this and make it don't say you want to make random colors, you could actually just add the color node to it. Okay, so I'm just doing this node, set it back here, and where did this guy come from? Oh, okay, okay. I remember I did initial state. Sorry, so it went to initial state of the first guy. So it's not really important. It just, like I said, it just takes the objects to wherever the original was, which is it was here. So if I push original here and I go to initial state, it just puts the mesh there. Okay, so now let's change that back. Okay. Okay, so paint effects. Let's see how paint effect works or what paint effect does. So what it's gonna do to the grid. So what that means is I can actually use a paint effect and create a painting and then distribute my mesh on it. So let's use a paint effect. Let's go into the modeling menu set. So I can handle generate and I could get a brush, right? So that's a paint effect brush, or you could roam under the windows and go to your um, and go on Windows General Editors Content Browser. Now, if you're using Maya 2023 and above, the content browser might be somewhere here. So don't be scared, but just in case, you could just come to Generate and get Brush to still open the content browser, just specifically where the paint effect is. All right, so let's take a flower mesh for now. Let's look for a nice flower. Something simple. Don't want something. Let's go with tulip. Okay. All right. And I stay here and paint tulip, and then it creates a tulip for me. Right. So I'm gonna do that. So let me make the mesh a little bigger. So I hold down B and increase size, so I can just paint tulip. So that's two tulips. All right. Okay. Um, So now back to the mesh. It's looking for a paint effect, right? So all I do is take my tulip, I click, drag, and drop it here, and then it distributes the object or the cube on the brush. So now you can go for flood mesh to flood it over to the next one. Because right now, as I increase, you can see because there are two, it starts at one, then move to the next one. All right, so but if I flood mesh, it covers everything. Okay, now we have leaves. I can make it cover the leaves. Okay, we have flowers. I can make it cover the flowers as well. And that's what the paint effect does. So, like I said, you can reduce the scale of the original cube so that you just see how it looks like. If you like, you can hide this so that you have something like this. So that's what the paint effect distribution means. You create um, the distribution based off a paint effect. Right. Okay, so and then we have the volume. So you can create like based on the volume. So using based on volumes, and right now the volume shape is a cube. You can change it to a point. You can change it to a sphere. So that's going to be that. So that's all about the distribution I want to talk about for now. Like I said, we'll go into our other videos. We'll go into more practical uses of the distribution type or the distribution process in MASH. But as you can see, MASH is a very powerful tool. And the next video, I'll be talking about a few other of the nodes so that we could see um, how we could merge these other nodes in the MASH network with the MASH distribute, so we get into get some things nice. So see you next video.